Good evening, and welcome back to the Not So Perfect Bigfoot Show. Tonight I have Barbara Shupe. And last year we wanted to do this interview, and she got hacked, and then I got pulled away, and we just actually this is like the third time we had to reschedule, and I finally got her sit down long enough with her life, and and between me forgetting dates and her being the busybody and life gets in the way. We finally got her here, and this has been so anticipated. And Barbara, I actually have a friend that is about to die to watch this, and her name is Lavani, and she is so waiting for me to put this out. So Barbara, let's just roll into it. Tell people as much or as little as you want about where you're at and what it was like in your life when you were growing up. And let's just kind of walk our way up into your first experience.
Okay. I grew up in a small community in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, a little town called Enumclaw, and it's a farming and logging community. And I grew up on a little farm. We had some cows, sheep, goats, chickens, pigs, just a little farm. But I spent most of my free time out in the back field sketching pictures of the mountains and dreaming of the day that I'd be old enough to be here. And as soon as I was old enough to drive, I headed uphill, and I've been here pretty much ever since. And, I can't say exactly where that draw came from when I was younger, but being older and looking back at it, I think maybe the universe knew that there was plans for me up here, and I was drawn to it. It was pretty strong. And right out of high school, I worked for the Forest Service, and then I worked for a couple of different logging companies, watching equipment on logging sites, and that was pretty adventurous. And I can remember, looking at the mountains around me and thinking, would it be so cool if a Sasquatch just walked across that hillside right now? And of course, none ever did. Back then, anything short of a full sighting or a perfect footprint, and I would have been completely oblivious to it. I wouldn't have known a vocalization or a structure or anything like that. And then when I was done watching equipment, I moved to this little community of Greenwater here in the Cascades, north of Mount Rainier, and little cabin here on the river. And that was in 92. And I've pretty much been here ever since. There's a little trail that across the road that goes up the mountain behind us here. And the very first time I took a walk up that trail, I found a couple of snapped off treetops, little trees, and it got my attention. I was curious. So I started looking around, and there were two trees right beside the road there that they had come from. So these are thick, healthy, bushy little trees. I'm trying to figure out how those tops got snapped out. So I stepped back into the bushes behind them to get a better look. And I looked over, and there was a little stump there that about so big around, and about that much of the top had been snapped off. And even old rotten wood, once it's broken open, it's pretty bright, it stands out.
Mhm.
So that got my attention. So I looked over there, and it was right at the bottom of about a 2-foot drop off. And at the bottom of that bank right next to the stump was a perfect giant footprint. And I stepped down there and put my foot over it, and it was virtually identical, other than it was massive. And looking up and forward, I could see where this whole scenario had played out, where like a hand had come down on that stump, and the foot came up on the hill. The foot slipped, the top of the stump snapped off. And then you could see in the moss, there were two more footsteps that went up between those two trees where they had just reached up, snapped them off, and thrown them down, I'm assuming in frustration, and then walked away. And the guy that I was walking with that day, he looked at that and he said, "Don't you ever tell anybody, because I'll deny it." Well, that didn't hold me back. But yeah, so that was my very first walk up the trail up here. And, back in those days, I was thinking that it was like one lone individual passing through to more remote places. And I never, ever would have imagined that there was like a clan that lives here full time. But over the years, there were a lot of strange things that happened. There was, I'd find things in the woods, strange structures, piles of limbs and branches and oddly woven and combined things that like Sasquatch do. But back then I didn't know about that. So I was thinking that, that it was probably kids messing around in the woods, or, I can even remember being concerned about a forest fire coming through because we've got all these piles of kindling out here. And, I'd hear owls that growl. I know birds well enough to know they can't growl. And rocks that were thrown. Quite a few times I can remember thinking over the years, I wonder if that's something a Sasquatch might do. But nah, we it's a small town. If we had Sasquatches around here, I'd know about it. We'd be talking about these things over
Yeah.
coffee in the morning, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Nope.
But but the rock throwing with your forestry background and your logging background, I mean, you've got a lot of background there to be aware of your environment and what is natural and what is not.
Well, when something isn't part of your reality yet, back then I believed in Bigfoot, but I didn't focus on it. It wasn't something that it didn't come up first as an explanation for things, So like when the rocks were thrown, we'd be out in the river, looking for rocks in the river and a big boulder to go kerplunk in the river beside us. And you look over there and you don't see anything and you think, okay, well, it must have been an elk or something just kicked a rock off the bank. Or even if it's an irrational explanation, it's still the only explanation you have, because it's like, well, elk don't hide and I don't see the elk. And it's really too flat for a boulder to have been kicked out into the river like this. But what else could it have been?
Yeah.
Once Sasquatch becomes part of your reality, then it's just as likely to be a Sasquatch as the explanation as anything else. But until you reach that point, it's pretty much the end of the list. It was about 2006, 2008, right in there that I was out here in the yard one day, and this big black ball of hair jumped out of a tree right here beside the cabin, and he came straight down, hit a limb, bounced off that limb over the roof of the porch to a tree on the other side, uh, bounced down to hit the limb on this side, down to another limb, then back over the roof of the porch, and he hit the corner of the porch and was just gone. And this just happened just like that. There was no arms, no legs, no tail, no wings, just a big black ball of hair. And
Wow.
by process of elimination, I always came back to baby Bigfoot. But at the time, it seemed ridiculous because, well, I mean, who has Sasquatches in the trees over their cabin? And where's mom? And, a lot of questions like that, that no matter how many times I thought about it, I always came back to baby Bigfoot only because I had no other explanation. But it wasn't until a few years later when I actually got a good look at one of the bigger ones up here that I finally came to accept that that's what that had been.
Wow. So when you first looked at that print when you were at that stump and you put your foot over it, you knew then. You knew what was that like for thinking about it all these years and wondering about it, and then it's real to you.
Well, even having found that track back then, you're in a mindset where it's almost like Santa Claus. Like, is there just one? You mean they have babies? Your brain never really goes beyond that. Just Sasquatch exists to think about, that they'd actually reproduce,
Yeah.
or, so your brain just doesn't go that far until you really, start having experiences and especially if it's not something that's part of your world, that you have any kind of a social or a family to talk about it with. You just kind of on your own to speculate. So
Something that's not normal to your environment.
yeah. Hmm.
It's like a legend that you just got confirmation, or you're starting to get pieces of that confirmation. And then
Hmm.
I imagine when it went over the roof and down the tree and over the roof, and you're just getting glimpses of it, it there's another piece of that puzzle. So things go on. What and you started having you were literally educating yourself on it, but they were educating you also.
Hmm.
How
Yeah.
was that? How was that path that you took? When was the next incident, or was it just started one day and it just when you kind of intuned yourself to what was out there, you started seeing the signs and that activity started increasing, or did it happen over years where they were kind of comfortable with you to have that activity?
Well, I think I'm pretty sure I was on their radar for a long time, but um, I don't know if they were waiting for me to be ready for the right time in my life for me to jump into this, or if they were just preparing themselves. I'm not sure. I could only speculate on that. But my next big turning point would have been in the late summer of 2012. We have a house about 5 miles upriver here, and I was up there, and one of my chickens had been run over the bank down into the riverbed into a big
Oh,
for trees that day. One of the neighborhood dogs had come through, and I got all my chickens back except the one. So that night, I was just sitting there by the open window, hoping that maybe she'd make a sound and I could just go out and find her.
mm-hmm,
So I was just sitting there, everything's quiet, and I'm playing bingo on my iPod. And I heard an Ohio howl type scream from across the highway on the mountainside. And the first one, I heard it, but it didn't really register.
mm-hmm.
And then it did it again. And it's like, I darn near gave myself whiplash looking up from my bingo game when it clicked what I was hearing. And of course, here I am holding a device that actually would record, but it didn't click, didn't register to that. So I went outside and I heard it two more times. And I had heard this on TV and in recordings and things. So I recognized, I knew that's what it was. And I started asking the locals, the neighbors in that neighborhood, and because I worked at the little store here in town, little mom and pop store. So when they'd come in, I'd ask if they'd heard or seen anything odd out there. And like I said before, being a tiny community, everybody knows everybody and knows what's going on, and nobody had ever talked about anything like this. So I was really surprised that there were quite a few people that stepped forward and said, yeah, that either they had experiences, that they had had sightings or heard the vocals, or it started a conversation where people were learning about it. We'd start talking and they'd be like, oh, you mean they throw rocks? Well, there was that one time that this happened, or this time that happened. So there were a lot of people that once the conversation started, they realized they were actually having experiences too. They just weren't aware of it at the time, rationalizing and chalking it up to the neighborhood kids or whatever, something
Yeah.
like. Mm-hmm.
I tell people, how many times have you heard laughter in the woods, and like especially after night, and you thought it was. I know we have a place in Cumberland County where the deputies used to say they would hear laughter in the woods, and at the time we would think, oh man, that graveyard's haunted because you have to walk through a graveyard to go to the path to get to a river, and it was behind a church in the middle of nowhere. And they would be like, oh man, that place is haunted. And knowing what I know now, it's like could have been Bigfoot out there, you know. You could, I mean, it literally could have been Bigfoot out there,
Yeah.
and it would make sense because we had sightings in the area, in the Falcon area, but people don't talk and they don't communicate, and when they do, they want to argue or they have this different point of views, and we lose our communication.
Yeah, that's really sad. There's you can't learn anything if you're right about everything. You know,
This is true.
you got to be
And
able
so,
to, take it all in and make up your mind based on, not just the things that you believe, but other people's experiences too. You got to be able to listen to that, pay attention. But
it's,
I
I
don't
agree.
think I've ever heard them laughing out here. I've heard a lot of other things, but I can't say I've ever heard them laugh. I've heard singing and a lot of owl calls, and I can remember one time before I knew that the Sasquatches were out here that I actually called the tavern to complain because I thought the bartender had kept people up all night drinking because they couldn't even talk. They couldn't find their way home. There's
That would
people
make
outside
sense.
here that are just sounding really bizarre. I don't know what went on up there last night, but
So that
what?
would, yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense. I think the town the town drinkers will say got the short end of the stick on that one, Barb.
Probably. That was pretty bad. I had my turn bartending up there and nobody ever left in that condition.
So were you did you start out flesh and blood and the abnormal or the strangeness just develop over time? Or how do you approach that subject to people like me? I kind of lean flesh and blood, but I start to hear things and I'm like, am I, because you hear so much high strangeness around it. And so I keep my mind open. So I start leaning, and then it's like I wake up one day and I'm like, no, no, no. So I guess that's bad for me. But for someone like me that's trying to understand and wants to be open minded and embrace all the opinions out there, so I can feed me and learn. How did that happen? How did you? Because at first you think they're flesh and blood. See
I
the
did. Started off thinking fully flesh and blood. Um, I had already been interested in the paranormal, as far as like ghost hunting and uh, a little bit into UFOs and things like that. Not so much as ghosts. Ghosts and Sasquatch, I think, were always my bigger interests. But in the days that I worked at the tavern, the tavern is haunted, and we did a lot of ghost hunting up there. So when I first contacted the BFRO over a sighting I'd had up here, the guy came out and was telling me about some of the campouts that they have, and they have ghost hunting people, and I was really confused by that, thinking, well, why would you have ghost hunters on a Bigfoot camp out? And he said, well, they're paranormal. I was like, really? I didn't know anything about that. I'd never heard anything about it. I was still really new at this. So I was really surprised. And then, because I'd seen strange lights in the woods and orbs and a lot of odd things. And I always chalked it up to ghost stuff. There's little yellow orbs bouncing around on the side of the road out here. Well, those are the ghosts of squirrels, right? Things like that. So it wasn't until the Cloaker event happened in 2014 that I finally started making the transition myself. I had a sighting up here in 2012 where the Sasquatch had stepped behind an invisible curtain. He had just vanished into thin air. And at that point, I had never heard of cloaking. I didn't realize it was an option. So I had gone back up there and looked at that spot probably, I don't know how many times over the course of 2 weeks, over and over from every direction, trying to rationalize what had happened, where this huge creature had disappeared to. And finally, I rationalized it into, well, he had just dropped to the ground faster than my eyes could perceive and then crawled away behind a rise where he was just out of sight. And that made it so I could talk about it because, well, how do you tell people you saw Sasquatch and it just vanished into thin air? I couldn't do that. And so it wasn't for another 2 years that until the Cloaker event happened that I finally started facing the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And even then it took a good deal of time to wrap my brain around it because there's a big difference between looking at a video and seeing something that you can't figure out and walking up the trail and knowing that there's quite possibly an individual standing right beside you that you can't see. And I made a trip to the Blues in 2015, about 9 months after the Cloaker event. And that week that I spent over there, that was when I got to see the eyes glowing up close. I was not zapped necessarily, more of a gentle sizzle. But that week was so full of paranormal events that were all associated with Sasquatch that was when it really was cemented into my brain that, there's way more than just flesh and blood going on here. And then I think that's what part of what makes it so difficult is because they are flesh and blood. They live like we do. They breathe, they eat, they reproduce, they live, they die. They are flesh and blood, but there's more. They have more abilities than we do. And I don't know that they're born with it or if they have to learn how to do these things. I can only speculate on that, but it's definitely real. And they can do things that, we can't even imagine, like Close Encounters and Predator, and, you see Star Wars with the Wookiee. You see these things that in movies that you go, wow, that's kind of like a Sasquatch. And to me, I think, a lot of these things are inspired by real things, that whether or not the person that wrote that story actually was aware of it,
Mhm.
or energies and beings that are out there gave them this, put it into their heads. But yeah, the things that you see in these movies aren't necessarily fairy tales. Oh yeah, fairies are real too.
I have been told that by two very credible researchers. And they said they were about 10 inches long and had wings, and that they would never repeat that in the public. So,
Well, I
I
have
mean,
them
I've
on
heard that
video, so
twice. I've I've heard that twice. So I'm like, okay. But the thing is, you don't always have to explain it to experience. And I understand, people they want their answers, but you can't always give people an explanation.
Mhm.
Sometimes science hasn't caught up to what you've experienced. And if it does, it explains it in such a way that we haven't figured it out yet. So you went 2 years thinking they were flesh and blood. You seen the one on the hill cloak. Do you think it intentionally come out for you to see it, or do you think you surprised it? Can you go into what happened?
Well, it was part of a bigger experience that I had been up here at the coffee shop getting my coffee on the day before, and there was a local guy in there that had been giving me a hard time about the vocals I had heard a couple months earlier. And he kept telling me that it was just neighborhood dogs barking. And I kept telling him, no, it's not dogs. And this morning he was up there getting the coffee too, and he told me that he had finally heard those howls himself that night before, and he agreed, yes, they were not dogs. So it was pretty cool that that guy was there and acknowledged that. Well, with him was a retired timber faller that lives here in the area, and he piped into the conversation that he knew where the Sasquatches were, that they live on the hill up behind my cabin here, and that back in the 70s when they were logging, they'd show up to the job site, and the spools of wire and the oil drums and things would have been tossed off the cliff down into the canyon where the creek that flows past here comes from. So, okay, well, that. I'm going to go up there and check it out. I'd been to the top of the mountain here before, but it had been years and years. And so that was my plan. My next day off was the next day. And I made the hike up there, and I got up toward the top, and the view opened up, and there's a perfect stump right there beside the trail. So I sat down to take a break, and I started hearing this weird talking again. And it was very similar to the drunken tavernites that I'd heard years before that weren't from the tavern. But it was very strange. And at this point, I had heard that Sasquatch could talk, but it was not something that I thought was real. I thought that, these are just another form of wildlife, and wildlife can't talk. So I don't know what it is I'm listening to, but I didn't think it was Sasquatch. And it got pretty loud. It was just maybe 100 feet down the hill in the bushes. I couldn't really, make out exactly, but it was at least two individuals going back and forth. And then I'm thinking of every horror movie I've ever seen, where there's mutants, and I'm thinking mutant hunters or something. There's somebody out here hunting elk, and I don't know what's going on down there, but I don't want them shooting up here. So I got my sticks out of my backpack and I gave them a whack, and everything went silent. I'm thinking, okay, well, at least they don't know that I'm a female up here by myself, but they know somebody's up here. So hopefully, no shooting. So I figured, all right, let's get going now. So I put my sticks back in the backpack, and I stood up, and the bushes right behind me were so thick that you couldn't see into them more than maybe a foot. And from in those bushes, I heard this deep "Urgh," And I'm thinking, bear, okay, there's a bear up here. We've got to get moving. So headed up the trail. This Gabby was with me. And we got up to the top, and I looked down into that canyon, and I got my sticks out and I did some knocks, and absolutely nothing happened. And waited a little while, did it again, still nothing. And I can see it's getting late in the day and it's going to take me a while to get back down. So I started the hike back down, and there's a stretch where when it gets down lower on the hill where the trail crosses the logging road. And from there, you can go down around this really steep switchback, or you could just take a little stretch of trail that's very short but very steep. So I went ahead and took that little stretch of trail, and in that area, it had been selectively logged before, so it was very open, and you could see a good distance in there. So we were about halfway down this little stretch of trail, and right beside me, I hear this very human-like whistle, very loud whistle. And I look, and Gabby's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and there is nobody there. So immediately after that, there's another whistle from down at the end of the trail below us. There's nobody there either. And okay, rationalizing, it must be the elk whistle. I've never heard him whistle like that before, but that must be what it is. So we got on down to the next section of road, and from there, the trail is really steep and rutted out. So I just opted to take the logging road the rest of the way. And Gabby's walking ahead of me, and we went down. There's a little bend in the road, and she stops and looks back at me, and I knew, okay, something's ahead of us. So I take a few more steps, and sure enough, there's two elk standing there on the road, right around the bend. Okay, that's what it was. We just heard the elk. So the elk step off over the bank. We went down around the next switchback, and I look up, and it's like, oh yeah, there's the whole herd up there on the hillside. And I keep walking, and maybe another 50 feet, and I hear all this crashing, and I look back behind me, and the elk have come down off the hillside behind me, and they're running along the road. They came behind me and then running along the road, and I'm watching them go. And then in the distance on the other side of them, I see a gorilla. We don't have any gorillas. Oh my God, it's Bigfoot. And in the first instant that I looked at him, he looked at me, but then he turned and he focused on the elk, and he just went right behind him. And he was behind the last yellow leaves of a vine maple bush. And so I could see him very clearly from about mid chest up, but I couldn't see him below that. So as he's following the elk, I'm thinking one more step and he's going to come out from behind those vine maples, and I'm going to have the full body view. Well, that's when he took that one more step, and it was like he stepped behind an invisible curtain. He just wasn't there anymore.
Wow.
And I stood there and I stared at that spot for, I don't know how long, 5-10 minutes it felt like. And when I finally took my eyes off of that spot and I looked down at Gabby, she was staring at the exact same place I was. So I know she'd seen it. She wasn't moving a muscle. So that's when I just, okay, it's getting late. I didn't want to, be out there after dark. So we finished up our hike and got back to the cabin. And I spent 2 days in here just trying to wrap my head around what had happened. And that's when I started going back up there, and circling around that whole area, trying to figure out how he disappeared. Because, here I saw Sasquatch, but how can you tell people you saw Sasquatch and it vanished into thin air?
You tried to debunk it.
I did.
You tried your best to debunk it. And I know when I saw something, your mind goes to a place where you're trying to justify it, but you're saying, but I know that's not true. But you still go back to what you know, or what's safe for you, or what's rational for you. And it takes a while for it to fully kind of sink in. And it's pretty, it can be a pretty long process accepting it. So,
yeah.
So when you went up there, they started getting familiar with you. You weren't a threat to them.
No, no. Right off the bat, one of the first things that I did was I took an apple out, and I just put it at the base of a tree nearby where I'd seen him. And I checked that apple daily, and nobody ever took it. It stayed there, which I thought was also very weird, that no raccoons or no elk or nothing else took the apple either.
Oh.
So that was the first time that I thought that maybe the wildlife in the area knew that it wasn't for them. And
or they were just staying away a little bit.
yeah. Well, one of the odd things that happened about a week afterwards on one of the trips back up there, on that upper stretch of road where the elk had first stepped off, as I'm coming up, and that is, I can see it up there, and I can hear this. I thought it was like a little dog or something. I thought maybe one of my neighbors was hiking up there with a little dog, because I could hear this little yip type sound. So I'm watching and nobody comes down the road. And then behind me, I hear all this crashing through the trees, and I'm looking and I can't see anything. It's moving fast and there's a lot of crashing. And then I see this big bull elk down on the spur road. He comes up and there's a cow down there and she's just standing there. And this bull elk comes up out of the bushes. Oh, knocking things over. This
That's
bull elk
funny.
comes up out of the bushes behind her, and she's just standing there like she's mesmerized. She's not doing anything. And this bull elk gets in front of her, and he's up on his hind legs, kicking and rearing like he's fighting something, and there's nothing there. So
Wow.
at the time, of course, it's only in hindsight that I can even speculate on what was going on. I was totally confused, because here I thought this was just a little dog I was hearing, and it turns into a bull elk. And now this bull elk is protecting this cow that seems to be oblivious to everything. And I don't know what he's fighting, because there's nothing there. But
Wow. Did you
yeah.
see anything like the elk go down, or do you think um, you coming up might have saved those elk? Or
Um, I don't know. I could only speculate on that. I think that there was probably something there. I think that the elk, maybe there's some herdsmanship that goes on. I think that they're protectors of the herd themselves, but I don't think that they hesitate to take one when they need one. And
yeah,
I think the elk know what's going on. I think that maybe, some of the zapping and the scanning that we get is something that's used on the wildlife to stun them and calm them, and keep them from causing too much damage if you're trying to take one out. But the bull elk, he definitely knew something was up. And since then, I've seen the elk out here a couple of times, both in the highway and the little yard at the top of the road here, where they'll rear up and kick and spin like they're wanting to run, like they're terrified and wanting to run, but they don't know which direction to run to. So they'll just spin on their hind legs kicking. And if you just see an animal doing something like this, clearly they're in distress. They're wanting to fight. They're wanting to flee. They're feeling that they're being threatened, definitely. But why aren't they just running? It's because they don't know a safe direction. They don't know what's there. And for all they know, they're surrounded. So stay in the middle of the highway, where you're safe.
yeah. And elks they can get rather large,
Oh,
so you'd
yeah.
have to be something massive to take them down. That's
Hmm.
pretty. Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Now, your background as a forestry, working in forestry and logging, you would have more knowledge about what goes on out there than, the average person like me going out there. You would know, when you're seeing breaks in trees, what's from, like I know Forestry Service will lean trees or, limbs up against trees so they'll when they have controlled burns and stuff, so they'll burns. So I mean, so you kind of have that background and you know these things, so you have an advantage on people, but you also have credibility. You also have, you went in as flesh and blood. You went through the what am I seeing stage, but you had the guts to also speak out about when you started changing on that. And I want to thank you for that, because there's a lot of people still on the fence. And I think it's really important to have both sides of the story out there, but it takes someone pretty courageous. And you have caught a lot of slack over the year, but you've always stood your ground, and that has always stayed with me. How you have always stood your ground on it, and I just want to commend you on that and put that out there,
Well,
because you
thank
do have a back. You're welcome. You do have a background that a lot of people don't know or don't realize that
you.
you've had that training, and you know.
I've been in the woods for a really long time. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So when you started seeing this, you go back out there, then you see the bull elk. You eventually they've started just having a lot of activity around you, and
Yeah.
you got where you could pick up when they were around. And you want to go into that because I find that fascinating. Fascinating.
Well, um, I also I got an online and started looking for other people that were doing Bigfoot stuff. And I started watching some videos on YouTube, and I found some Facebook groups. And I found um, uh, Matt Johnson was having Bigfoot meetings here, not too far. And so I started going to those on a monthly basis. And that's where I learned about gifting. So I set up my own gifting area out here. And every week I'd go out and I'd take them toys and different foods. And, at first I started off with just, simple things, just fancy rocks and, like a salt lick and, some produce, things that, wildlife would want. And then, as I learned more from these meetings about the things that other people were gifting, that's when I started giving them jars of peanut butter and more toys. And I started giving them a pie every week. Um, I think my idea of it at the time was that I was going to be habituating them, getting them accustomed to me so that I could get closer to them. But the way that it really turned out was I was the one being habituated by them. It took probably 6 months before they started actively really taking the things that I was offering them, not just moving them around and looking at them. Um,
Wow.
it was the first jar of peanut butter. They opened it by squeezing it, by popping the lid off. So it was squeezed flat, and then you could see it
Wow.
used a stick to dig the peanut butter out. And yeah, there was like balls, flashing balls. They liked those. I gave them bubble wrap. They did it once. They took the bubble wrap back across the creek and sat and popped it all and had fun. But much like us, it was good once. I gave them more bubble wrap and they never touched it again. Um, I left candy and fruit and nuts and a lot of things like that. So got to discover what they do and don't like. I had friends who were also had a gifting area about a mile upriver and on the other side of the river. And I had blue glass mason jars that I was leaving stuff in. And one of my jars turned up at their gifting area.
Are you
So that was
serious?
pretty cool. Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So,
So,
so gestures like that, you're like, it's got an it's got thumbs that carried it that far. But when
yeah,
you know, you know.
there's no
Now,
raccoon going to carry it upriver and then cross the river and put it out another stump somewhere else. So,
raccoons, I know, would probably bust it and keep going.
yeah, yeah. Not think.
Now, do you find that they're attracted to a particular color?
No, not really. I think that's probably something like us. They just have their preferences. Somebody's going to like green, somebody's going to like blue, somebody's going to like yellow. I didn't notice any. I used a lot of, ow, sorry, my cat's getting me. Ow, Sparky.
We let cats come on the. I got swamp kitty, so we let cats crash the
Okay.
show.
Well, she may walk through here in a minute. She's mad at me now, I guess. You're getting my
Sparky,
cat. Yeah,
Sparky,
Sparky.
you be a good Mau Mau. You be a good Mau Mau, you bad kitty. I
Oh,
love it. What? So eventually you started getting things on video, but let's go back for a minute. When you started into this subject, the web weren't out there. So, and I like that because you based your individual experiences until I know I got my first computer sometime in the 90s, until then it was like nothing. So your experience was your experience. And how was it like going out there and finding out that people were having those experiences and something, especially someone like from the BFRO that says, look, this really happens. How did that make you feel? You kind of
It was pretty exciting. It was something that, I've had this interest pretty much my whole life. And suddenly, here it become a reality right in front of me. And it was pretty cool. I made a little poster at the store and said that there's a guy from the BFRO going to come up here. And if anybody else has anything they want to talk about with him, now's the time and place to be here. And yeah, it was really exciting. It was so the opening of a whole new world. I really hadn't even been online. Didn't have a computer or anything like that before that. I would go to my mom's and visit her, and I'd say, so Mom, can you put some Bigfoot stuff on the computer for me to read? So that was my only real access before that.
So you had some validation. That goes a long way.
Yeah. And the BFRO website that you can go county by county in every state, then I got to actually zoom right in on my own home area and find out about the other things that were happening here too. And because I had been getting stories from people at the store, and I'd go to these meetings and I'd hear about other people's stuff in other places, but the BFRO reports got to let me hear about things that were strangers that were experiencing things right here, and that was pretty exciting. So yeah, I really love doing that.
So you eventually started get things on video, putting it out there. You actually sent me one where you're sitting on the hill. I have the video and I have the eye shine. Do you want to go into that yet, or do you want to lead up to that?
Well, I can tell you that the video with the eye shine is something that happened out here this last spring, early March. I guess maybe it was late winter still. I had quit recording when I started making videos. It was at the very beginning, and it was because I had seen other people on YouTube showing structures and sticks stuck in the ground and footprints, and it's like, I have a camera. I've always wanted to make videos. I loved America's Funniest Home Videos. I wanted to make some too. And now here I finally had an iPod that had a camera in it, and I have all this great stuff to show. So I started making videos thinking that, there are people out there that this is going to be important to, that this will go to the scientists, and the researchers will be able to have access to this stuff that's so important. And then the other people online that I was learning from, they'll be able to see what's going on here. So that was why I started making the videos. But then after the Cloaker event, I kind of just put my camera away while we were out doing stuff, because I didn't want it to detract from the experience. I didn't want them to not do something because I was holding a camera. So for a long time, I was very happy to just tell about it afterwards, make a video of the recreation and tell the story. But then I realized that every time I was turning the camera on, things were happening while I was recording. So then I finally realized they don't mind if I have the camera on. So I don't put out trail cams or mount things here and there, but I'll carry it, and I announce it when I'm walking and I got the camera on. I will say I'm recording. And they're giving me things, and I fully believe that the reason that they do is because they want these things to be shared. Like the eyes video, it's not going to be much longer before any video is going to be accused of being AI.
AI, correct.
So for them to give us something like that, that to me, that's as good as the Patterson-Gimlin film, where that this is an actual video that's not created in some computer program. This is something that was actually caught on camera. It actually happened, and it was real. And so I think that's what that was about. And then one other video, the leg prints on the bank, we had been having these campouts, and this is the culmination. This is the last camp out of the last season of the last 10 years of doing this. We have now reached the point where they're coming right up to our camp, to our fire, and listening to us talking about them, and they're interacting with us. And those leg marks are the marks on the bank were just underneath where we were sitting and listening and talking about it. So
let's put your video up here of the eye shine. If you want to walk us through it.
Okay.
Here you go. All right.
So this is zoomed in and frame by frame. And when I was recording, I just was going to get a couple of minutes of footage to do a voiceover video to tell a story and a couple of pictures. And when I was up there, I knew something had happened, but I wasn't exactly sure what until I got back and I started looking. And
Wow.
I was filming at 60 frames per second, and he flashed his eyes at the camera, and he's visible in literally 5 frames of 60 frames per second. So that's how fast he looked at the camera. So my eyes
Wow.
didn't see it when it happened. And maybe they did because I knew something had happened. So maybe I did see it subconsciously, but I didn't know what it was, only that something had happened. So I got back and then this is the zoomed in enlightened version. And you can not only see the eyes glowing, you can see his eyes behind the glow. But in frame 3, right there, you can see the outline of his head. So,
Up there.
and you can actually see the log behind him
Yeah.
right through there.
So where can they go to get more stuff like this and to see the video if they want to take their time and kind of see what you got up there? That's
I have
incredible.
reels on Facebook that I've really been enjoying making the reels. It's kind of a challenge to get as much information into a minute as I can. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I have longer videos that goes into more detail and shows more about it, shows the recreation. I went back up there and measured this out. It made it really handy because he looked at me between a forked tree, a dead forked tree. So that was like having sights to go. I could go right back to where I was on the trail and go right through those 2 broken branches, and it aimed up, lined up directly to where he was. The next cover was 60 feet from the forked tree, which put him about 75 feet from the camera. This little cluster of trees right in the middle of it. I hung my lantern in there, and my lantern was hung at 5 feet. And doing a comparison picture, you could see that the eyes were at approximately 3.5 feet off the ground. So he was either squatted or sitting in there. But we had
Wow.
walked past him twice. I mean, literally twice. So he was cloaked, and neither Goldie or I knew he was there.
Oh. So let's
And
go ahead.
oh, this was less than 100 feet from where the original Cloaker video had happened. So 10 years apart and upgraded camera, but basically the same thing. We have another Cloaker in the same place.
Wow. So let's look at this.
Show us how long your legs are.
Pretty neat.
So this is where they were up on the ridge while you guys were at the campsite.
Yep. So this is
Look at
right
that
on
smile.
the riverbank. So just
Wow.
behind me is where our group area is, where we sit and we have our fires. And one of the things that we discovered was that they like to listen to stories about themselves, particularly if they have done a heroic act and they like to be appreciated. So we started telling, first we were reading from Bigfoot of the Blues is when we first discovered this. And we were reading stories about things that had happened in the exact location where we were at. And they were behind us whistling in response to these stories. Okay, so now I come home to Greenwater. I go onto the BFRO website. I print up some of the local reports from the exact location where we're at here. And they're coming in to listen to these stories and they're responding to them. And, you know, we're camping right next to the river. You can hear them coming in the river. You can hear the splashing. You can hear the responses to the high points of the story. And then that was at our other location here in Greenwater. And then this was our main location where this video was filmed. This was our last camp out in September. And one of our campers is also a ghost hunter, and she had given me these little like cat toy balls that are they're just little plastic balls with lights in them that are motion activated. And I had taken one and put it out on a root wad in the river, and one on the river bank just downstream from where those leg prints were, and one like directly upstream, still within view of where we were sitting, but on a stump that was kind of overhanging the river. And then that first night, I could hear them coming. They weren't even waiting for it to get dark. And you can hear the splash, splash, splash as they're coming across the river. And this was the big one. And one of the new ladies in the group had come up and was asked me what I was doing. And I said, well, listen, they're coming. And so she's listening, and sure enough, she can hear them coming too. So she starts talking to him, and then we hear the splash, 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 splash. There's a little one coming. You can't see him, but you can hear him. So she's talking to him, and you can hear him responding. They're like slapping the water in response to her. So then I put these balls out. It gets dark out, and we're sitting there around the fire because everybody on the riverside can hear the stuff, but on the other side of the fire, they can't hear it so well. So now they have the visual cues with these flashing balls. Sure enough, not long after dark, one of the balls not only goes off, but it gets picked up and moved 8 feet from the downriver up to just above where those leg prints were.
Wow.
And that was seen right there in camp. And a few minutes later, the one upriver on the stump, that one also went off. That one I had placed on these 2 little cedar twigs. There was a little X that I set it in there to keep it from rolling, and it had been lifted up out of there and had been pushed down into its own little divot to hold it when I went to check on it.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the sopping wet individual with the really long legs was laid there on the bank and left that mark for us. And I'm not sure if he was on his back or his stomach. It's just up a little ways. There's also a handprint that was right there where he had dug his fingers in.
Holy cow. What?
Yeah.
So, okay, let me pick your brain. Let me pick your
Okay.
brain. What is the most peculiar behavior you can contribute to a Sasquatch that you don't hear a lot?
Jazz hands.
Jazz hands.
Jazz
Do
hands.
tell. Do tell.
Okay, well, I should say hand, not necessarily hands, just hand. At our other location here in Greenwater, it was the June camp out. We were right there beside the river, and we had put up a canopy with a sidewall as a windbreak, and it had been raining, so we had a shelter tarp over the top of us too that goes over the fire. So we're open on 3 sides, and we have a roof and 1 wall. So I'm sitting there. Lee's sitting next to me. We got the fire going. The only light source is the fire. And I look over at Lee, and coming out from behind that sidewall, I see the shadow of an arm and a hand on the bushes right there beside it.
Mm-hmm.
And I tap on Lee's shoulder and I said, look, look. So she looks. And by this time, the arm had come out to the point where the arm had kind of disappeared into the shadows, but you could still clearly see the hand. And the hand is doing this. It is jazz hands. So I'm looking at
Wow.
Lee. Lee, we're both watching this. And Lee, she turns around and she's looking at everybody else. And she's like, everybody wave your hands. She's trying to figure out who's doing this. Well, none of us are doing this. And Russ, he's sitting there and he goes, no, you can clearly see none of us are waving our hands. And yet it is still going. So
Wow.
I think jazz hands is probably the weirdest thing
Wow.
to date.
That's pretty incredible story.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah, and it just did it till eventually the hand just kind of disappeared into the shadows, and the source of what was there creating the shadow, we don't know. Never saw it.
Wow. So to say that you have learned to cohabitate with them, that's an understatement. It's like a playground back there. What kind of pies did you feed them?
I would give them berry pies, apple or blueberry. One time we gave them a cream pie, chocolate cream pie, just to see.
Oh.
And I had this basket that we'd suspend from a rope on a limb from a tree, the way they recommend for hikers to do to keep the wildlife out of your food. And the regular pies were, about so big, and they fit perfectly into that basket. But the cream pie was bigger, so we kind of had to wedge it in pretty tight between the handles to get it in there. So it took some doing to get it squeezed in. So I went out to check on it, and they'd gotten it out of there. And apparently they don't like the whipped cream because it looked like they had just taken it and just flung whipped cream everywhere, because there was literally whipped cream everywhere. but there was not a single bit of chocolate or crust to be found. So they
Wow.
scraped off the whipped cream and
Wow.
yeah.
So, so really I'm not going to say played, well, it was a game. So I mean, it was a game. You give them pies and, they, I mean, the interaction is incredible.
Hmm.
When did you decide that you really wanted to come public with it? I know you had, um, you know, get-togethers, but you talk now, and you've been everywhere, and you've told your story. What motivated you to do that, and how did you deal with the people that did not want to hear your experiences and accept your beliefs? Because I mean, beliefs, whether your faith or lack thereof, how you grew up, where you're at, the person you are, your character, all of that plays in to
Hmm.
what shapes you and how you approach the subject, whether, people want to accept that or not. I mean, it is. How do you accept or approach the people that are skeptics as far as the high strangeness with it? How has that affected you, and how have you found that the community is now more accepting of it than it was back in the day, or do you find people are kind of still um, kind of firm that flesh and blood and nothing else? The strangeness is just a coincidence. Did that make sense? I can get long
Yeah.
winded.
Well, I think we all create our own reality, based on our perceptions. Everybody can perceive things in a different way. You can have the exact same experience, and based on where you're coming from, either it was a gift or something terrifying. And to me, all of these experiences are gifts, and I'm not afraid of them. I don't know whether that's on their part or my own. I spent a lot of years in the woods, and if they were going to get me, it would have been a long time ago. That's the way I feel about that. So I never had a reason to be afraid of them, but I realize a lot of other people do. But I figure, what other people think is their business, and I'm going to tell my truth. I'm going to speak my truth, and I'm not going to alter it for the sake of making other people comfortable. And I know it makes other people uncomfortable, but that's that's their business. If they don't like it, they don't have to watch, they don't have to listen. I'm not going to change my views and my reality to suit other people. And this is this is something that's very important to me. This is not just like a hobby. This is life changing. This is world changing. This is enlightenment. This is something that is so important that it is way bigger than me. And it's the gifts that they've given me aren't for me to just sit on and hoard to myself. These are meant to be shared. And if other people don't appreciate it, well, at the very least, they're going to lock it away in the back of their mind so that at some point in time when they need it, they can go
Mhm.
back and they can refer to it. And I'm really sorry if there are people out there that it upsets them, but that's not my problem. That's on them. And if they don't like me, that's also on them. I'm going to keep doing my thing, and I wish them well.
That was a very powerful statement, little mama. That was a very
Oh, thank you.
statement. So, so you started speaking publicly when you started reaching out to people, and people started reaching out to you. That was life changing for some people. Is there a story that really just sticks in your mind where somebody reached out to you and you were able to make that difference and help them make that life changing connection with them?
Well, there's not one specific story. There are many stories, and they're basically all the same. And they come from women who felt the draw, but by watching my experiences, they were inspired to go out and start reaching out on their own. And they have now made connections, and they are now reaching out and sharing with other people. So it's this ripple effect of life-changing moments that have been passed on. And for me, that's the most satisfying part of all of this, is knowing how much I've helped the people who were just waiting for that nudge, people who were on the fence and just needed a little push, or people who just needed the inspiration to know that just because they're a woman, they could still do this. You know, seriously, the Bigfoot world is a man's world. They've got control over all of it, and most of them are pretty much lost. I don't think they're going to progress much farther until they open up and start accepting some of this other stuff as being real. I mean, you can only go so far with wood knocks, and you know, they're not going to respond to you with anything that's of any value. And I would say that for all of these people that are out there looking that they want to prove something, give up the idea of proving anything, you know, because the only person you really need to prove it to is yourself. And if you need validation, take friends with you. And then when you get people that you can stand up with you and say, look, I'm not crazy, he was there too, you can actually have a whole bunch of people that are going to start listening to you and believing you, because you're not just that one sole crazy person. And then the tribe starts growing. And whether it's the powers of the universe or the Sasquatch or whoever it is, but they know who needs to be brought into this, and they send the people, they send them. So when I'm out camping, the people that I'm with in the woods are the people that are supposed to be there. I don't question it anymore. I don't stress over whether or not anything's going to happen, whether or not anybody's going to be disappointed, because I know we're all out there for a purpose.
Mhm.
And it's not my doing. I'm just kind of the person that brings the firewood, you know, makes the coffee.
I'll take Folgers instant. I don't want nothing fancy. So let me ask you this. So when I first, had my encounter or the thing, um, some people say, I call it canine crypt, but I'm gonna just put it out there. I opened up a can of worms. It took me a while to go out there and really want to start investigating. Back then, the Bigfoot world was not open to canine cryptids. It was like, you're there, we're here. When I first started going out, and this has always just kind of, maybe you can give me an answer. When I first started going out, it seems like me and my friend, we were having activity. We were having, I mean, it was there. We were having activity. We're having the odors. We're having like the bells from an animal's collar ringing. We had the silence in the swamp. But the hurricane came and it stopped. Well, it's like I can go out forever now and have zero activity. My husband can go out when we're together. We might get, the last time we were together, we got the time before last when we were up in the western part of North Carolina, we saw orbs. That's fine. But he seems to have more experiences when I'm not around. And it's kind of just the opposite. I'm like, that's not fair, because I think other than going on South Mountain, North Carolina, and hearing whoops last year, I mean, there was probably 4 years, nothing. But so I'm wondering if I had a different frame of mind when I was first went out, that, I was naive and, everything was fresh. And, then when you get into like, I don't research anymore because I don't think they need our help. But I go out now and I was like, nothing, I mean, like, but my husband now, he doesn't have it every time he goes out, but he's had some pretty good stuff. And I said, well, maybe somewhere between here and there, my aura has changed, or I'm closed minded, or I try to debunk too many things that it's just killed it for me. I don't know. I mean, do you even know where I'm going with that? I
Yeah.
mean, do you have an opinion, or because I'm not getting it like some people get it?
Do
Is
you
it
ever talk
me?
to them?
Do I ever? No. I'll talk to everybody else around and I'll just jack my jaws all day. But no, I don't talk to.
Well, I think there could be a number of things that are going on. First of all, where you're at. They recognize, they get in your head and they know where you're at. So if you're not in a good place for them, they will back away. If they've given you a major experience and you need time to wrap your head around that, they'll give you time to just let things soak in. It could be that they like your husband a lot. And
He's a sweetheart.
yeah, oh, you're lucky. You're lucky. My husband doesn't really want much to do with the Bigfoot world. But he's he lets me do my thing, but he doesn't really want to participate. But I would say talk to them, and yeah, just tell them how you feel. Tell them what's in your heart. And I think that when you're out looking to collect evidence and prove or disprove something, that will make them back away. When you're out to learn about them and enlighten yourself and to share, I think that's when they are going to really respond to you. Because if you're seeking the answers because you really need to know, and if you're really open and willing to talk to them, I think that's where the real information is what they're going to give you. It's not what, I mean, you can go out and find a footprint and take all the measurements you want. You can measure anything. You can measure all of it, and it's not going to teach you anything. But if you talk to them and you get them to the point where they're going to want to interact with you, or I should say, they get you to the point where you're going to want to interact with them, you're really going to learn a lot more, because then it's all going to be firsthand things, and it's all going to be little subtle things. So I would say, first of all, talk to them. And second, find some part of your life, some part of your day, every single day, like some little part of your world, whether it's in your car, in your yard, in your house, on your porch, some little thing that you pay attention to every day. So, like, for instance, here I have a bird's nest on my porch, and I put, there's a couple pine cones and some little broken eggshells in there, things like that. But they'll put things in that. They'll rearrange things on my porch just to see that if I notice, to see if you're going to pay attention. So watch for very small, subtle changes on a specific thing that only you will notice, because they're not going to do something big that the whole neighborhood's going to go, oh my God, did you see that? They're going to pick some little tiny, little insignificant thing that's not going to make a darn bit of difference to anybody except for you. And it'll be very personalized that way. So just look around, pay attention to your surroundings, and not just out in the woods, around your home too, because they'll come home and they'll visit you at your house. And yeah, just look for the little stuff and talk to them and put out your intentions with, put it out to the universe what it is that you want to get out of this, because I think that the people that they really are going to back away from are the people that don't have their best interest at heart. And I really don't believe that's you. So, yeah, I'd say talk to them, and you're already on their radar. So it could just be that they're waiting for you to get to this certain point where you're ready. And because they know what's in your future, and where you're at and what's going on in your head. And yeah, they know.
Do you think that they can pick up if you've had a TBI,
A what?
a traumatic brain injury? Do you think they
Oh,
pick up?
yeah. Yeah. And I think that for some people that even helps. It helps to reroute the brain chemistry, maybe makes it a little easier for them to get in there and be able to see what's going on. Because a lot of the times that we have experiences, I don't think that the experience is actually happening. They're just triggering something in your brain, like particularly with the odors. She's dreaming.
That's precious.
She's you can see her over
She's
here.
chasing a squirrel.
Yeah. She is.
That's awesome. I had a yellow lab named Yellow Dog that used to do that. That was his name, Yellow Dog. I was a
Yeah.
lazy mom.
Hi, old dog. But
But you said they can get it, like get in your head, or it makes it easier. Yeah.
like with smells and odors and things like that, you can have a bunch of people sitting side by side and everybody has a different experience. So which one was the real experience? I think they were all real, but they were just individualized. So it's basically just a minute trigger of chemicals in your brain to make you experience one smell over another. And if they can get into everybody's head and have everybody around the fire have that experience together, they can do a lot of things. And they know what's coming up too. They know what's in your future. If I don't know how far out that goes, but at least within a few hours of what is coming, so they can put you in a spot where you're better prepared for things.
Can you
And
give me an example of that? Would it be like not to go to your car because maybe something's about to happen, or
yeah, or just don't drive to town today, or put the camp over here, not over there. Things like that. And a lot of times it's just something will just pop into your head, and you could either go, oh, what the heck, and blow it off, and you're going to have some problems, and you'll realize, if I had listened to that little voice in my mind, things could have been different. Or you will follow that little voice in your head and things are different, and you're going to realize, oh my gosh, this could have been so bad if I hadn't. And I can't say for a fact that it's them that gets into your head and tells you these things. It could be angels, it could be your spirit guides, and honestly, I don't know the difference between all of them. So
well, you get the same reports that people hear them talking in their mind. That I mean, you get the biggest burly, muscular. I drink 10 beers a day hunter out there. Just and I say it's nothing against men, but I'm just giving you the stereotypical, where I come from, we call them rednecks. The next thing you know, they're telling their story, but I heard it talk to me. But then you get, little Miss Annie down the road that says, I heard it talk to me, but it
yeah.
didn't talk. So you get two totally different people, two totally different characters, probably totally different parts of the world, but you're hang on, my screen popped up. But you're getting these reports from people that don't even know each other, from all walks of life, from all, I mean, which little Miss Annie could be the alcoholic, or she might be the one with the beer under her arm and the gun going through her. I mean, but I have to be fair, but you have to, I mean, you're getting it from people that don't even know each other.
Mm-hmm.
So there is something there.
Yep.
What have you learned about yourself through this?
I learned that I have a lot more capabilities than I thought I had. I've learned that I don't need to be afraid of the things that I was always afraid of. I've learned that I have a voice, and that there are things in this world that are really important to share about. And when something is really important, suddenly being afraid to talk to people goes away. That I used to be pretty shy.
No.
Over it. Yeah, you
Well,
can.
when you think, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you can find your own strength inside yourself to do the things you never thought you could.
And you get to spend time outside in the woods.
Hmm. With wonderful people. The worst day of squatching is still a wonderful day of camping. So,
And you know what's overlooked, whether you're flesh and blood or you're someone that has seen high strangeness, we all just kind of sometimes we bicker and uh, this person stands firm on that person stands firm on this, but we both get criticized by outside people that don't believe in Bigfoot. That's the one thing we have in common.
yeah,
Whether your opinions are different, we're all getting criticized from the outside.
I don't hear them. I've got my happy little bubble here with the Sasquatches, and I don't hear them.
Well, let's just go into what you have come to know about them, about your perspective and what you have come to know, and what would you like to share for someone that maybe is a skeptic, but you have the opportunity to open a window for them. What have you learned?
Well, first of all, they're not monsters. They're a different kind of people. They are flesh and blood with abilities that we can't quite understand yet, but that are completely real. And, I fully believe that all of these things that they can do someday will be, scientifically explainable. But until then, I'm perfectly happy just believing that magic is real. And if you want to have this kind of an experience, open yourself up and talk to them. And I think any real knowledge is going to come from them, what they're going to give you, rather than what you can measure from what you find, footprints or structures or hair samples. All those things are well and good. They're part of the fun. It's good to have a few Bigfoot casts around to show people, but the important part of it is the connection that you make. Um, and even if you can't have that connection with them, you can still create a beautiful connection with other Bigfooters. You can make friends for life with people that you would have never known any otherwise from any other route, you know. And I think just talk to them and keep an open mind. And it's all truly beautiful gifts. And it's just magic. Magic is real. And it's just beautiful. That's I guess that's about.
It can be a beautiful world when you make it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've touched on a lot of like how you come to know, and I really wanted to get into your mind because I wanted to show you as a person. We hear about your work and we see your videos out there, but I really wanted people to know you as a human being. And I know we've talked about, a couple of your sightings. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or any other sightings that you want to talk about, or anything you want to put out there?
Well, the fairies are real. Um, Never been a fairy person. Bigfoot has always been my thing. But this last winter, there was fairies decided to fly at my camera, and when that happens, fairies become your thing too. So there's.
So, you actually broke that video down too, didn't you? They can go see that on your Facebook.
Yeah, you can see the one, and I've seen them since then. They've been around. There's one, I don't know if they're like insects where there's a queen of the hive or something, but there's one that she's different. The first one in the video, she's bright and she flutters and she kind of looks like a leaf that flies horizontally.
Wow.
And she's beautiful. The other ones aren't quite as bright. They're more of a dull grayish, but they're super fast. And in the one video, you can see I measured it out. It went from, it was 123 feet down the road to the point that it went over my shoulder was less than half a second. And I mean, I literally had to slow the video way down just to be able to really see them. And yeah, they're totally real. And they've been down here at the cabin. They interact with us. So, they're not just balls of energy. These are solid living beings. Because the solid balls of energy are also out there too, but they're not the same thing. And yeah, so this uh, last May, about 7 miles up here at our camp out, we went out for a night walk one night and got buzzed by two of them. And one of them, size of a grapefruit, flew right at me and I leaned and it went right over my shoulder. And I was recording when it happened, and you can actually hear the whoosh of it as it goes by.
Wow.
So
So you got the fairies, and Penny Rumble's got the orbs, don't she?
yeah, yeah.
I love her. I love her so much.
Oh, me too. We have a blast together out here. And okay, so I got one more little story I got to share with you.
Oh, do tell.
So last June, a tree fell on my cabin over here from the neighbor's yard. And I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And when I woke up, I was already sitting up in bed. My eyes were open and I'm looking at Goldie and she's looking at me. And the first thought that goes through my head is, don't try to run. You're just going to run under it. Don't try to run. And then I know there's a tree coming and I know what tree it is. And then the tree falls and there's not a
Ooh.
bit of damage to my cabin. Nothing. There's not even a shingle that's punctured. Nothing wrong. Okay. So I am so grateful about this, that my cabin has been protected. And clearly there was some kind of intervention here, because this is the only time in my life I've ever woken up sitting up with my eyes open already. So there was something going on. So that was in September. And in June, Penny was here and we're out here in the yard sitting around the little propane fire pit. And I was telling her about how I had woke up like that and the tree fell and everything was okay. And I was talking about how grateful I was about this. And suddenly the most powerful smell of sulfur is all around us. And it wasn't like a bad smell, but it was like a big smell. It was intense. Yeah. So it's like, okay, they're acknowledging our gratitude here. So then the next night, Lee and Terry and Debbie come and join us. So now there's 5 of us sitting around the propane fire pit. And Penny and I are telling them about what had happened the night before, about talking about this story about the tree falling. And then the sulfur smell came. And while we're telling them, the sulfur smell came back again. Except this time it didn't just come as one big smell. It started off that way and then it petered out and it went around the circle. And each of us got to have our own sulfur smell. Except for Terry, who also got to have some flowers. So we think maybe Mama Sasquatch, she might have been here too, because she always smells like flowers.
Oh man.
Yeah. So then about an hour later, we're heading off to our tents. And Penny, she's got this little 4-person tent with a queen size air mattress in it. Doesn't fit very well. So I'm walking by to my tent and she asked me if I could zip up the front for her. I said, okay, well, let me go put my stuff down. So I went over to my tent, put my stuff down, came back to zip her in, and the sulfur smell was back, right? Very strong right there.
Wow.
And have not smelled it since. Never before, never since. So to me, that was the tree catcher. And then just after our September camp out, I got a glimpse of him up here just across the trail. Goldie and I were headed up, and as we're crossing the road, there's a big wood knock. And then we get up there maybe 30, 40 feet, and the 2 huge stick breaks right across the creek, and there's nothing there. Walk a little more, 2 huge stick breaks, stop, look, there's nothing there. And then I get to the part of the trail where it starts to turn away from the creek, and I look back over my shoulder, and there he was right on the other side of the creek. And he was as big as a tree, and my focus was on his hands. These just massive hands. And by the time I was completely turned around, he was gone. So to me, that
It's
was,
like
yeah, he's the tree catcher.
validation, the
Yeah,
tree catcher.
yeah.
Wow. That is incredible.
He's my protector. And I'm very grateful.
That is incredible. So we've been going about an hour and 20 minutes. At the end of each show, I know you know this, I try to give people a few moments to pay tribute to anyone. It don't have to be in the Bigfoot community. Do you have anyone in mind?
Um, I got to say how grateful I am to Arla Collins
Amen.
Williams. And she has been such an amazing guide and teacher in this for me. And Tom Cantrell, and my acupuncturist is a miracle worker, because without her, I don't think I'd be able to do all these things. So, are you there?
I am. I was giving you
Okay.
your moment,
Oh,
but
okay.
I wanted to tell you you are a very amazing person and you're very beautiful. And I think your story is beautiful. And I like the fact that you stand your ground on your beliefs and your experiences. And I thank you for opening the door to so many. I hope you never change because the reality is regardless of what side of the fence you're on, we all get criticized by the outside world, and we need to listen to each other a little bit more. And I want to thank you for being the person you are.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you
Well,
for being who you are.
well, thank you. I'm a work in progress, but I hope you come back on, maybe do a live show and answer questions one night. And I think that if you see Penny, give her a hug for me, and if you see Tom, just give him a big old hug and then bang him on the top of the head and tell him it's from Miss D.
I will do that. I'm going to see them both on Saturday, so I will do that.
All right, send me pictures and thank you.
Thank
And you have a
you.
wonderful. Bye
You too.
bye.
Bye.